Okay, so this is just a simple little exercise to get us started, and with all of these green exercises, they're going to be simple and give us a little bit more mechanical knowledge, right? And then we just build these components into something a little more complex, right? So the first thing that I want to talk about, I'm going to be drawing with this pen because it's a little bit more visible on camera. But you should do this same drawing with your 2mm lead holder, right? So you have a 2mm lead. I'm looking around. I can't find my right now, but it's around here somewhere. Oh, here it is. So for you, this drawing will be way better with the 2mm lead. It doesn't show up that well on camera. So this is so what I want to talk about first is this idea of visual schema, right? So you might think of a visual schema as it's sort of the simplest unit of visual communication. It's something that, we're taught socially. You learn it during childhood, and it is a visual representation that is commonly socially agreed upon, right? So you might have something like a visual schema of a light bulb, something like that. It's something we all recognize because this is sort of something that we have agreed the light bulb is, right? You might have a visual schema of a tree. That's kind of my favorite one. And you learn this when you're a kid. I think it's an oak tree, this schema, right? You do the branches up here, and you do this little cloud thing, right? So all of this, when you think about schema and you see kids' drawings, you think, when you're a kid, these are just beautiful and they're so fascinating and it's so fun to learn these schema. But, the art of drawing doesn't mean that you have to throw these out. This is just a unit that you have been taught that represents a tree, right? So the art of drawing is just devising new visual schema, right? Or making these more complex. So we're going to talk about that in this exercise. All right. When you look at the tree, you see it's kind of like, it's cut out and it's flat. We're just looking straight at it, but we know that the tree is actually round. We know that all the parts of it are round, and none of it is a cutout. So this exercise is just basically drawing in a way where everything that you make is round. So what we're doing here is we're just, instead of the tree trunk, you can think of as a cylinder, right? And if we look at it in a schematic way, it's just a rectangle, right? So that's basically all we have. If we make a schematic for a cylinder, we end up with this, basically, right? But a cylinder isn't like that. It's round. So we're going to draw by, instead of having a cutout line, a schematic line, we're just going to draw these loops. And these loops really take us around the outside of the cylinder, right? And it really feels much more dimensional, right? You can clean it up kind of by connecting them. And you can make these assessments, right? Like, oh, okay, if this is the top of the cylinder, then this loop must be the bottom of the cylinder. Cool, right? So this is just a different kind of schema, but it's three-dimensional, right? It's saying, like, in this schematic language, this would be good for a cylinder. But what we're doing instead is we are spending more time allowing our line to trace around the surface of the cylinder, right? Now, one thing that you'll notice is that in perspective, which we'll talk about in great detail, but whatever is closest to eye level, if you're drawing cylinders, it'll be a little more closed, right? If it's further from your eye level, it'll be more open, right? So this cylinder all of a sudden is really, really accurate, right? Now let's try that same, so we're trying to just draw these kind of nebulous forms, right? So let's do something like a rock, and let's keep that same thing in mind, right? So I don't know what this is, but if we take a line and we trace around it, we wrap around those contours, this whatever circle comes out here will be more closed. The circle down here will be more open, and then in this we're a little more free. We can still be cylindrical, but we can imagine sort of the undulations of the surface of the rock as we move around it. Cool, right? So now we're really starting to have a three-dimensional object here, right? All right, cool. And you can really see, parts where it overhangs. Like maybe that would be, that would be an overhang. That would be an overhang. That would be an overhang, right? This would be an overhang, right? So all of a sudden, like, wow, there's not really a schema for a rock because they have so many different forms. But I really have a sense of this object being three-dimensional and existing in space, right? Cool. And I even have a sense of, this is what I would do more with ink. So I'm trying to imagine that this is pencil, right? Okay. Now let's take this same idea and readdress the schema that we started with, the schema of the tree, right? So everything is cylindrical and it's all really organic, right? So let me see here. What should I do? Oh, I'll just make it small. Okay, so basically, when you're drawing a tree, right? So you might think of the trunk. You might think of a tree is pretty tall, so the midpoint is going to be our eye level, right? So I'm putting my eye level right there. That's when where the cylinder will be completely collapsed, or where that little ring will, right? And now I'm I'm just drawing the whole tree. I'm trying to base it on these rings, and I want this ring should expand and get larger as it goes towards the ground, right? And then that'll form my root base. My root base is going to be here, or something like that, right? And now the same thing is going to happen as we go up into the trunk. So, your rings don't have to be perfect, right? And let's just focus on the trunk for now. But then we can sort of derive the outside. Cool, right? Now every tree, when it branches out, I'm going to run out of room, so I'm going to do it again. Okay, so this is my eye level, right? And then these rings, remember you're doing this with your pencil. These rings are getting larger because I'm looking down at them. Then from this, I can find the outside edge. And then every single tree has at least two major divisions, right? And this is getting larger too as it's going up. So I'm going to make this off center kind of. I'm going to make one like this, and then I'm going to make one like this. Really cool. Right? And then I'm going to think about kind of the logic of it here. Then for the roots, I'm going to just try, I'm going to think about the direction of those cylinders too, right? Actually these are pretty narrow because I'm looking straight down on it, so my vision can kind of slice it in half very precisely, right? And go through the work of drawing the whole thing, right? And we're thinking about the root like grasping into the ground. Try to keep these really narrow. Cool, right? See how three-dimensional that feels? Like it's so hard, and you can see when the root is turning away, then it changes, right? Now look at this. We have this attachment point where even if we're looking directly down on the root, we know that it has to connect onto the tree in a certain way, right? We know that we have to get to that, right? The same here. You can think about that connection. This is already really, really cool. Now I don't want all my roots to be the same size because they, will kind of look like tentacles. So I will make this a little bigger and then work through it like that. See, you can feel that texture. You can feel the outside, like when it gets, when it gets flat, when it stays rounded. You can tell kind of where your eye line would be. If you're here and you're looking down on it, you get the feeling of looking down. Seriously. And then when you branch out, cool. You branch out and it's really obvious where it connects. All right, so you can see now there's so much more dimension. Like we can see where this attaches to here. We can see this attachment here, right? And maybe for this part I'll do the same thing, but maybe I'll be a little bit looser, a little bit more linear, right? I know that this is going to be going up. But I don't want to draw the branches so articulately that I can't draw the leaves, right? Okay, so this we're imagining, since this is my eye level, we're imagining that this is going away from us, right? That we're looking up into the branches. So another thing about every tree is that the branches, the structure of the roots is going to be vaguely circular, and so is the structure of the leaves, right? So we get to here, and this gives us the sense that we're looking up on the underside of this massive thing, and I'm not sure what's going to be here, but I know that whatever it is going to fall into these upward facing rings, right? Cool. And see, we've basically drawn the same thing that we have here, but we've just given it a sense of space and of place. And all these details become really interesting. We can still go back to our schema here, and we can have this little hole in the knot hole that the owl lives in the schema. For some reason, I always think of it as an owl. But we know that we're looking down on it a little bit, right? We know that it's going to be below our eye level. So we draw it that way. We draw the ledge coming out like this. And now, from our new knowledge of the schema, if we have an owl here too, we can construct it the same way, and we also know that he's below our eye level too. So he's then looking down, that his beak is a little lower, his eyes are a little lower on his head, because we have that knowledge, right? Even if we don't look at a reference of an owl, it still comes out really well. I mean, because we've sort of placed that in the right place. We can think about the little edge of it or whatever. Cool. But what we do have here is we have a really good sense of looking down and looking up. Cool. So, oh, see, those shouldn't be that collapsed. All right, so I'll make these, kind of trail off. Make these trail off. I'll make this trail off. I'll make this just trail off because it'll become part of the mass. But the leaves up here are also, we're going to think of them as these organic masses as well, right? Oh, you know what? I'm really needing another root right here. Cool. And then because the tree always has two divisions, at least two, there's always a major fork in the tree, and then there's probably some secondary forks. Then you end up with, you never end up with this kind of unified cloud. That doesn't make any sense because the tree has these three separate divisions. So you would end up here with sort of three separate objects, and you can treat them exactly like this rock that we drew, right? So and remember they're all looking up, so we're going to just follow our same visual rules here, right? That we're looking up. We don't know what mass this is, but we kind of know how it's going, and then we're going to treat the leaves as a texture, right? So this one is going to yield another mass. We're always looking up, right? We know that we're looking up, and then you get sort of like, gosh, you get like this feeling of the genius of Dr. Seuss, for instance, how he will only draw, he'll just draw the mass of the tree and he hardly ever draws individual leaves. He just draws like these masses. And then here we know it has to be aligned with the others, and we know that we're going to be looking up. Okay, so that is kind of a simplification, but if you have this basic schema, which instead of just a schema of symbolism, it's more like a schema of space, right? It's like a spatial schema. Then there's so much that you can craft onto this, and it's really fun to build objects out of cylinders. Okay, so one more thing is I'm gonna switch materials here, and this is like whatever you guys have in terms of tone will work and make sense. I'm not gonna have. Well, actually, no, I should do that. I'm going to add some waterproof ink first before I start. So that because that pen that I use is non-waterproof, so basically I'm going to lose all my lines. So what I'm going to do to begin with is start using waterproof ink just with a little brush. Just so I have something to resist here. This is a cool brush. It's called a rigger. It makes nice long lines. And I'm not being too careful, but I know that all of those lines are non-waterproof and they're all going to vanish. We'll talk a lot more about line, but I always think that line sits outside of the object. You see what I mean? Like, I think line delineates, the line is on the outside edge. It's never for me. I never want to make it on the inside edge. Otherwise it becomes part of the structure. So see, here's the edge of the tree. I always put the line on the outside. I think that makes a lot more sense. Then you can see the line is, the line is abstract. It's something all of its own. Has nothing to do with the object. It's really the cutout of the object. I don't know, that's the best way I can explain it. And and you want it to be, gosh, I love just making line that's like sensational and expressive. It's nothing. You see what I mean? It's like where it's after the edge of the thing, then there's the line. It's kind of the way that your mind works. Okie dokes. Oh, broken line is just beautiful for this sketch as well. Now I'm going to let that dry, but I'm also going to, and I also need some line for my, I love just letting the line be free. You know, like let the line kind of interfere with the drawing. Right? The line is not the structure. Remember, we think of these as big separate masses. And here I'm using the line kind of like an element of light. And it's also kind of absorbing it, saying like this is where you can't see anymore. Right, so these are big atmospheric masses. The line is sort of saying like we don't really know where they are, but we know there's 3 of them, and we know that we're looking up at them. Okay. Yeah, the waterproof ink, I always wait for it to dry, because basically it's really easy when you are when you're painting values, especially with ink, it's really easy to just get to end up with just mush. Okay, so maybe I will stop the video here and then I'll come back when it's dry. Okay, so now my ink is dry and I already have so much interesting stuff going on. And I'm going to basically just lay in a value, try to lay in values that show that the underside of the tree is dark, that the side away from the light is dark. But I can, because my waterproof ink is already set, I can work really freely, and my drawing will still be really crisp and expressive, just like I have here. Okay, so I'm trying to really control basically my color. I don't want it. I want it to be dark only where I want it to be. Does that make sense? So the darkness has to follow that same ring, like that we're looking up, because that is the bottom surface of the tree, right? All right, so it's dark there, it's dark there. This is the other cluster. I need it to be dark there. I need it to be a little bit darker. All right, and I also want to mask this. I don't want the branch to be too prominent. All right, so there's kind of all my dark values. And then the tree itself, like, I can think of the light hitting it in a certain way. I think if it has this much corrosion, if it does have this little cavity that this owl lives in, that's going to be really dark too. So he's going to be, very barely visible in there, but I still want to see the drawing, right? Now, the trunk, as it comes down, will kind of stand out from it won't be as much in shadow. So I think maybe the roots will be some of the brightest part of this whole drawing. So I'm going to leave those bright, and I'm going to treat everything as medium. So, gosh, I really have a sense of expression. I have a sense of really dynamic line. I have a sense of, I have a sense of the shadow under these masses. A little more. Just make that ink bleed a little bit. And and I really like this because I wasn't even looking at anything. I was just kind of taking my original schema, like this guy, and seeing if I could make it, and seeing if I could add to it, right? So instead of like those individual parts that we all know really well, like the branches and the trunk and that little owl that lives in there, and then what I did is I just sort of gave it a sense of position, like I was actually seeing it. Really adding in those shadows. Okay, and the other thing is you can't forget the environment, right? Like everything is in space, and it looks weird for things to not have space. So this same light that changes, cast by the trunk itself, it goes everywhere in the environment. And of course it goes over the roots. Cool. So yeah, I really, really like this. It had, at that structural phase, it's like, it exists in your mind and you have to think about your position. What are you looking up at? What are you looking down at? But it's really not too much different than this. It's really, taking knowledge of objects that you already have in your mind and just sort of giving them a spatial dimension. All right, so that is your exercise, is just to draw this imaginary tree and give it a sense of three-dimensional space and a sense of shadow, and also just have fun with the drawing and the brushwork.